The only real path forward is to define the problems you seek to solve and build your own innovation playbook. It comes from Greg Satile in his book, Mapping Innovations. Gordon MacDonald goes on to say, almost every personal defeat begins with our failure to know ourselves, to have a clear view of our capabilities, both negative and positive, our propensities and our weak sides. Todd Henry says, you must structure your life around daily progress based on what matters to you, building practices and activities that allow you to plant new seeds each day with the knowledge that you will eventually see the fruits of your labor. I'm Chad Brooks, and welcome to the latest episode of The Productive Pastor, The Year. What's going on, friends? Chad's back. Took a week off, did some stuff, packed some boxes, got some things ready. Also did some pretty cool stuff in Productive Pastor Land, but I'm excited to be here with the podcast, doing all the things we've got going on about that. So you might be saying, Chad, the year, we're starting with this whole thing. Wouldn't it make sense to build things out practically first? Well, as Gordon MacDonald said, you can't do anything without knowing yourselves. And over the previous 6 episodes, we've had plenty of conversations about that practice of knowing ourselves. And if you've grabbed the workbook, you know that there's even tons of more stuff there about gaining this understanding of who we are, how we work, and how we don't work. So we kind of had to have all of those conversations about how we can have a janky relationship with work before we can start to have more positive conversations about what does it take to build out a healthy and an effective approach to personal productivity and ministry leadership. So we had to, make some changes, do some stuff, all of that sort of a thing. But here's the thing. Things are still changing, especially in our world now. A lot of things have changed. And so we're going to talk about this thing of the year today. What does it mean for us to manage this stuff? And all the things we're going to share and talk about are the results of the last few years where I've been on a journey from being a workaholic to being someone who's more mindful of my health and how my own vocational life is affected. I'm not here as a productivity expert. I say this every episode, but just another pastor alongside of you into that journey. So we're going to get going. Before we jump into this, I want to talk about a very specific resource, and there'll be a link in the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/007, that's really influenced the way that I think about these things and the way that we're talking about them specifically with this. And that's Scott Belski's book, Making Ideas Happen. It's great. It's a little older, like 10 years old, but it's so practical, super practical. The link to get that's going to be in the show notes. It's worth the read. It's cheap, it's little, but go for it. As I said in the last episode, if you've been waiting for high-level, old-school productive pastor content, then this is your episode, and actually your episodes. The rest of the season is going to scratch that itch. It's going to bake your noodle. It's going to all of the crazy additives we can come up with, but we had to have the first half of this season to put it in context before we can get that going. Now, one of the things that I talked about earlier in the season, and to be honest, I'm just fascinated with completely right now, is this relationship between control and agency. Ministry during this season that we're in now, it's long and it's tiring, and we've been doing things for the last few years that no one goes to seminary for. We've been in control loops where things are happening to us and we're having to react against them. Talked about this a lot, I think, in episode 1 and 2. But what I'm really interested right now is how we can gain agency of ministry in spite of, magic 3 words there, in spite of the fact that we still have chaos swirls. Because the chaos swirl is sadly the new normal. And even though we're going down this whole productivity path the next few weeks about the year, the quarter, the month, the week, and the day, this isn't about goal setting. This is about reclaiming agency in the ways that we can, places where we can be proactive, places where we can gain ground, where we can be doing a truly healthy and good ministry in spite of all the ways that Crazy Town affects us. And so to talk about the year, what this really is about understanding and discerning a preferred future and about establishing healthy rhythms that personally let us lead our congregations, that lead our ministries, but honestly, that just lead ourselves. And so what I want to talk about over these next few episodes is beginning to create whole life systems for ministry productivity. One that lets us build up awareness of what the seasons we're coming into might look like, what is going to be necessary during those times, what's going to be important during those times, what might need to be hired out for during those times, what are the things that we need to say yes to, what are the things that we need to say no to, and all of that. And this whole life system is based off of awareness of a couple of things. The first thing is this, it's time-bound awareness. This is the subtitle of the whole season 1 of the podcast right now. And the workbook spends an enormous amount of time and practical work going through this. And time-bound resistance is when we get caught up in the urgent and we end up neglecting the important. It's where burnout starts to happen, where breakdown starts to happen, all of this sorts of things. And I learned a lesson a few years ago, and it was actually from my dad. You might have heard me tell this story before, but I was at the church that we're at now, that we started. And we had a person who it was the first year the church was going on, and they said they were going to give us this sum of money for 12 months every month. And it was a decent amount of money. It was several $100s, and we were nearing the end of where that 12 months was up. And I was talking to my dad. He's a pastor as well, a church that's much larger than mine and than I will ever pastor. And I was talking to him about this problem that we had and how I was lamenting it. And I said, Dad, I mean, this is going to be like $4,000 or $5,000 a year we're losing here. And he talked to me about what was going on. He said, Chad, we had somebody who died last year, and we had a financial problem because of their death, and we had to find a way to get, and it was some number, it's more than my budget of my church currently now, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I realized that, little churches and big churches have the same problem. I've been speaking a lot over this season talking about the pastor of the normal-sized church, but seeing and growing up in a really, really large church to see how this works and working in all sorts of churches, this is the thing that I've realized, and this is what really kind of comes down into. Every church has problems. Large church problems are just larger than normal church-size problems. But when you really boil down to it, the difference of churches that I've noticed that I can kind of put my finger on it, that larger churches have, that smaller churches or normal-sized churches don't have. It's not resources, it's not money, it's not staff. And those things come into play. But what really is going on is that these churches have the ability to be strategic, where oftentimes a smaller church or a normal-sized church just struggles with that ability. And the thing is, strategy doesn't cost money. Strategy costs time. It costs awareness. It costs intentionality. And so much of time-bound resistance is us just realizing, hey, where are the things that are out of my control? Where can I gain agency? Where can I just be more intentional and learn things? And so time-bound resistance is about being strategic. When I brought the podcast back earlier this year, for a moment, I actually thought about renaming and rebranding the whole thing. And I didn't because, the strategic pastor doesn't sound nearly as good as productive pastor. And then also there's this massive, huge community that thankfully was still hanging out there. So time-bound resistance, it's about strategy. And that's really what kind of the next few months is teaching you to kind of build those things up. The second thing is about this whole life system is about being aware of your energies. And this goes hand in hand with the strategic thing. We can't expect to just go all the time and for it to be sustainable. We have to think about this in terms of what we are capable of, and we have to continue to learn about what does it mean for us as leaders in all of our uniqueness to find our place in things. One of the biggest lessons that I am learning right now, because I'm in transition, I'm moving from one church to another, and I'm moving into a very, 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 very different ministry context. But one of the things I'm learning right now is me at my best might be the absolute worst thing for the situation. That sometimes I find myself in places where I need someone else to lead because my strengths aren't the ones that need to be driving the bus right now. And that's a lesson I'm learning, and a lesson that I'm going to have to adapt over the next few months as I transition into a really, really different type of ministry. So the year, let's talk about the year. The year is all about planning. If you draw out a diagram, you pull out a piece of paper, and you think about how our work filters and gets more action focused, the year is at the top. So you can write the year at the top of your piece of paper. And at the very bottom of your piece of paper, you can write the day. And as it goes further down, it translates from planning to action. The year is all about planning, not about that much action. You've heard people say before that folks underestimate what they can do in a year and overestimate what they can do in 5 years. The year is all about planning. And so a couple things about the year. First, and this is this, my favorite way to talk about the planning is about going backwards. It's about starting with an idea of a preferred future, one that is gained through prayer, through questions, through research, through proactivity and intentionality, and involving others. And then when you're at a point to where you have an idea of a preferred future about something, then you begin to step it back and back and back and back and put practical things behind it. Now, I talk about this process a whole bunch in the workbook module for this episode. And you've heard me talk about the workbook a bunch on every episode. And some of you gone out and have purchased this. It's $30 for the whole season. And some of you haven't got it. But I've been thinking about this a lot. I want to give this module, this chapter, to everybody for free. The module, so the written content, the worksheet, the question content, the video that goes alongside of it, everything. I want to give it to you because I've been thinking about, okay, what is the one piece that is absolutely mission critical, no matter what, that I want people to have? And it's this module. It's about the year. I believe in it so much that I don't want to not resource it with you. So if you want to get it, make sure you go to the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP007 for this. It's my gift to you. Everything is in there. It's a downloadable package. The only thing that costs you is your email because I believe in it so much. So there's tons of information in there that I'm not going to go into on the episode. But one of the reasons that I like to work backwards in this approach to strategic planting is this. We think about something in terms of stating a reality. That's that preferred future piece. And then asking this question, what would need to be true? It's one of my favorite appreciative inquiry questions to ask folks and to ask about things. And what you end up doing when you're doing this kind of backward step strategic planning is you create a multi-step strategy to where the preferred future is not a goal, but it is the natural outcome of the work that you have put in it. So every single thing is a tactical action of I'm doing this, and this is why I'm doing this, and this is how I'm doing, and this is what I'm going to create. And so what happens is this preferred future is no longer just some dream or some big vision or some throw out there. It's like, no, this is what happens when we put all of these things into place. And when you hit those inevitable hiccups, and you absolutely will, your adaptation to that one hiccup doesn't throw the whole plan out of place. Instead, you say, okay, this was a problem. This was going on. We can get back on track because this is going to help us create this outcome. That ask that questions. What would have to be true? What would have to be true? And you might need to shift, and that whole process gets much quicker. Have you ever wanted to get to some place, had a vision, had a plan, something like that, and you got diverted and the whole thing just kind of went haywire and stopped? That's what happens when we forward think strategic plan. I much prefer to think backwards in strategic planning and what that looks like. So the second thing is this. You have to plan to be able to plan. Okay, that sounds kind of crazy, but you have to plan to be able to plan. I worked with someone one time who was this absolutely fantastic coworker and ministry leader and friend. She was a rock star, and she is a rock star still. And she was able to handle everything on this one legal pad. Now, it stressed me out because on her legal pad, she had this massively like running to-do list. It just gives me anxiety every time I think about it. It was like pages and pages and pages deep. And she would show up in the morning and would just start crossing things off her to-do list. And at the end of the day, she would just go home. Now, that can work for a handful of people. For me, it doesn't. I don't advocate it. But she was a great project manager, and she was a great event coordinator and planner, and she did this stuff outside of her primary areas of ministry because she was so good at it. But this is what she would do. When she came up to an event, if it had never been done before, she would think deeply about all the things that had to come into place and this sort of thing. But most of the time, it was an event that happened every year or every quarter, that sort of thing. And what she would do is she would just go back into her files, and she'd pull out the file from this event. And in there, she had her checklists, her asks, every bit of information she needed to do this event inside of that folder from the last time she did it. And before and after she would do an event, she would write down a few things that she would need to do next time, that whole 9 yards, and she'd put it in the folder. So she always did a fantastic job because she saved things. She planned to be able to plan. Merlin Mann is an original productivity person from like way back in the day. He had a website called 43 Folders, and his whole 43 Folders idea was interesting because it was about planning to be able to plan. It was about having all of this stuff inside of there. And so you have to be able to plan to plan. It really comes down to two systems. I did a live stream on this. The link to that live stream will be in the show notes, refchadbrooks.com/PPP/007. But you've got to have two systems. And I talk about these two systems a bunch in the workbook. But you have to have a working system and you have to have a storage system. Your working system is the place that you do your daily work, where your checklists happen, to where your scheduling happens, all of this kind of stuff. And then you have to have a storage system. This place that you just drop information, you save things, because you cannot do this work strategically without having these two systems. Now, for me, I live and breathe inside of Evernote for my storage system. I save everything there. I trust it so I can pull stuff out, that whole 9 yards. And I work in Trello. That's my daily task list, my weekly stuff. So my working and storage. You've got to have a working and storage system in order to plan. So this is the thing. And this is what I want to ask you about. What is that thing, or those two or three things that you've always wanted to do? You've always wanted to do them in ministry. You know you need to do them, but they just seem to be completely out of reach because you don't know how to get there. Friend, what I want to ask you to do is to sit back and think what it might mean to intentionally and strategically plan to make those things happen. That's what we're going to talk about over the next 4-5 weeks as we do the second part of the season. It's just to grab that. But this is what I want you to do. If any of this sounds intriguing, go and grab that free section of the workbook. Okay? I want to see you hit these things and learn what does it mean to be able to follow your call and to dream big and to see it just happen with the Holy Spirit moving and helping you do these things, and you getting leaders in your church and you equipping folks to do this. I want to see all of this happen. But it starts back with us saying, okay, this is how I learn to accomplish things. Now, some resources to kind of point at you. I talked to you earlier about Scott Belski's book, Making Ideas Happen. That's a good one. That's a super good one. The link to that's in the show notes. But a couple of other things to put off. Greg Satiel's book, Mapping Innovations. I talked about that. It's the very first quote at the intro section. I want to recommend this book because of how it tells stories of how things came to be. And what it focuses on is that it usually takes 2 or 3 unrelated things to make new things happen. And this speaks to the power of margin to be creative and margin to be inquisitive. These are very, very valuable things in ministry. And if we're overworked and just blown out, we're going to struggle because our mind doesn't have the space to begin to put these 2 or 3 things together. Like the slow side of ministry, the relationship, the prayers, the dreaming. This is when that sort of thing happens. And last, more practical, Matt Ragland's a great productivity follow. His YouTube channel is cool. It's easy to understand. And he talks about what he calls project sprints that are there. You can grab those in the show notes. If you're not part of the Productive Pastor community already on Facebook, I call it the Productivity Party. It's awesome. I would love to see you over there hanging out with us. But that's it. We're going to be back next week. Going to talk about the quarter and why the quarters matter. And so thanks so much for coming on and hanging out with Productive Pastor. Go grab that chapter of the workbook for free that I want to give you, because I want to see you just smiling because you understand this. So I'm Chad Brooks. I will be back with you in the next episode.